there was no laundry. And there was several people in Charlevoix that made their home a laundry. These summer people would bring their dirty clothes or sheets and so forth, and people would do them and deliver them back. Everybody tried to do anything to make money.
I'm sure.
Because there was absolutely no work.
Right.
My dad did. Well, and of course, the boats were laid up in the wintertime, but at a certain time in the winter, well, it was always cold, and the lakes would always freeze over. And so he got jobs lots of times with cutting ice.
Oh, sure.
Regular machines that would go out on Lake Charlevoix and cut into squares. And then in the summer, they stored it in a building, I think in sawdust. I don't know how that would keep it from melting. But
I've heard that too.
Yeah, there would be a drayman that would carry the ice around, and people would.
Was that for their ice boxes or to?
Yeah, ice box, not electricity. It was
so
just,
the milkman came, the ice man came.
Yeah.
Probably a fuel of some sort, coal or something.
And one fun that kids had when the ice dray would come by, when they chopped the ice away, there'd be slivers fall off. We'd all be picking those up and sucking on them for ice cream.
The original snow cones.
Yeah.
Oh,
So they can think of all the germs they were eating. They were still alive.
Yeah.
As a young man, being interested in boats, with a number of ship's carpenters that were building boats in this area, the south shore of Round Lake, there were places that built boats at that point in time. Even some bigger fish tugs and some tugs themselves. And so he worked for them, learning the trade of a ship's carpenter. Later he went on to the University of Michigan and ended up with a degree in naval architecture. And somewhere along the line, and I never did know for sure where, he learned the art of pattern making. So at that point in his life, he was one of the few people that lived in northern Michigan that could design the boat, make the patterns for it, and then make the boat. Unfortunately, there wasn't much call for somebody like that in Charlevoix, and he loved his beloved Charlevoix. He didn't want to leave. And
so that was about 1930 to 1940
40s,
in that time frame?
Yep. And then during World War II, he ended up going to work for Foster Boat Works Inn, which is located, or Foster Boat Works, which is now Foster Boat Works Inn, and down in Lake Charlevoix. And he was their architect, and they designed and built a variety of small craft.
Now, you went through any number of protests out there, one of which even got a statement from Ralph Nader, even though he never came here to actually investigate what was going on.
Yeah, we were proud of the fact that he cared about us.
Did you feel at any time that perhaps any of these protests were justified?
No. Being on the inside and operating the plant, I knew that we were working as safely as possible and making our power just as efficiently as we could. And the other thing I always felt is being an engineer and a practical person, it's not, there's risks to everything. I many times I said, in fact I said it just the other day, that every once in a while I felt like we should blink the lights just so that everybody knows that it's not magic that electricity comes out of the wall. True. That there's people working. When there's these articles in the paper about, well, the ambulance guys are working on Christmas and the doctors are working on Christmas. Well, I'm telling you, we worked a lot of Christmases out of Big Rock, to keep everybody's Christmas tree lit and keep everything going. So did I feel they were justified? I mean, everybody's entitled to their opinion. I always said, well, if you don't have us making electricity, how are you going to get it? And I'd said I'd rather live next to a nuclear plant, which I almost did. I was only 2 miles away. than live next to a coal plant any day. You know.
Can you talk a little bit about your dad's ministry here in Charlevoix and how that, all came together for him?
Well, he, I don't know what got him going writing the column, Nature Parables column, that he started writing for the Courier. I don't know what, I think he probably initiated it.
Did that come from his sermons?
Well, sometimes it would have something maybe from a sermon in it, but it was totally on the side of that. And one of the ways this church had dropped in attendance terribly while during the time period there was no pastor, and he would he had an ad in the paper every week with a sermon in it, title, and inviting people to come, and that would be at the end of his column. And the columns were always something about the natural world and just some religious connection. They were parables like Jesus wrote to illustrate something that he wanted you to know, to live by.
And weren't they all illustrated by him with pen and ink?
Yes, they were all pen and ink or brush and ink, mostly brush and ink.
Brush and ink?
India ink, brush and ink. Well, in fact, this is the first book. It was a collection of the columns that were at that time, the title of the series was called Feeling Low. And these are the brush and ink drawings that were in, a lot of these he actually did during that sick leave before we moved up here.
He was also a good, big-time TV boxing fan. Loved to watch the fights on Friday night.
Oh, did he really?
Yeah.
Oh, he'd holler at them. It was incongruous, though, to me. I could never...
It doesn't seem to go with his personality.
No.
No.
My family came from Scotland, and we've been here for 3 generations. And I found in the Northern Michigan Pioneer book my family, my great-grandfather, and in fact, there's a photograph of my grandmother and my grandfather, great-grandfather and grandmother. And it's also interesting that Vincent's family is in here. This was Andrew Struthers that came.
That's on her mother's
That's
side.
on my mother's side. And then Vincent's family, Abel Chew, W. Chew, is in this book. Interestingly, we have this book in the Michigan room. This happened to be my grandfather's, but, and on the Michigan Room Committee, that was one of the books that we preserved, which was kind of fun.
Now, in the Michigan Ring, you're referring to the Charlevoix Public Library?
Yes, to our library here. So it gives an early history. And it's also interesting that our early relatives were all involved in education in many ways and farming. Vince, tell about your, was it your...
My great-grandfather, Abel Woolston Chew, came here to teach school, bought a farm in 1879. And he had been teaching in Indiana, actually was born in New Jersey, but had been teaching in Indiana, and came in 1979, bought the farm out in Hayes Township, where Maple Grove Road ends at Old 31.
Now, this is just a couple of miles from the Struthers property.
Yes,
So the two families interact.
they knew each other.
And go back
Yeah.
2 generations.
My great-grandparents knew her great-grandparents, and my grandparents knew her grandparents.
And here we met so many years later, and he was in Flint, and I was in Charlevoix, and it was just
And
one
my
of those
father knew
things.
her aunts and uncles and her mother growing up. Sure.
Now, what nationality are you descended from?
English.
So English and Scottish.
Mhm.
Okay.
And David, I did want to show you the picture of our John R. Struthers, my grandfather, the homestead picture. And there was only one other owner of this property, and that was the Ross family, owned it first. And then my grandfather bought the property in 1909. And then my parents bought the 320-acre farm from John R. Struthers, my grandpa, then in about 1940. And then my father, grew the farm to 1,400 acres.
So when you bought all those other buildings, this one, of course, you didn't call Snisby's. Did you give it?
We called this Nisby's,
You
yes.
did?
For sure.
Yes.
It wasn't for how long, Sue?
Not very long.
Not very long before
No,
you
well,
decided.
when we moved in,
Okay, it was Snisby's when you first moved in? Oh
yeah.
my gosh.
It was
I would've been
Nisby's when we moved in.
Okay.
They were running
Yeah.
dime stores. I was their bookkeeper.
For all of those?
I was 16.
Yes, she's 16. She
Talk about on-the-job training.
Yes, she's got it.
Whoa.
And you know what she did before those?
What?
She sold jeans down at Jumpin' Jeans.
Okay. Oh,
Well, I tell this story when the kids could put their chin on the counter. That's when they started work. And that's when she started too.
well, when did you start, Jackie? How old were you before you did the bookkeeping for the?
You were
I
junior
worked
high.
at Jumpin' Jeans when I was 12 years old. I was I ironed his samples
We will not tell anybody
for
in the
$1 a
government.
day or something.
Yeah.
I ironed his samples all day long in the back of the Jumpin' Jeans store.
Well, and that served you well later on when you were managing all those young high school girls that were not folding properly, right? Among them, my own kids, I think.
Yeah.
Well, Sue, then did you work at Snisby/clothing company at first, next to Jim? Now you're in the clothing company and things are going well. How long was it before Judith designed the logo? This was your daughter, one of your four kids?
She was at Michigan State. She was a freshman? Sophomore?
And it's called Stacked Charlevoix, right?
Yes.
The sailboat.
Yeah, and I remember we were driving somewhere and she said, "Dad, what do you think of this design?" And she was in the backseat. "I don't know." Kind of funny.
Funny, wonderful, huh?
I mean, it's different.
It was very different. It was very modern
So,
compared to what you normally saw.
It just took off.
Yeah.
You know why? Because we were at the right time, and I mean, there weren't a lot of things with Charlevoix on them,
Right.
and there weren't a lot
Sort
of.
of like before T-shirts.
There weren't a lot of stuff. It was before T-shirts.
Well before.
Yes.
You were on the cutting edge.
Yeah, we were.
And
yes.
that was Judith.
Yeah.
I mean, her
She's always
concept.
been
Her
a couple years
concept.
ahead of
Yeah.
things. Yeah.
And what?
There is still a very rocky ridge that runs through the width of the property. I mean, you can't hardly do anything there because it's just solid rocks. And I have an excerpt here that from the Sentinel from 1909 that Willard Smith put in the paper. It says, A. Reynolds of Rocky Ridge Farm, just north of town, brings us a sample of corn cut fresh from his field that is on exhibition in this office. It will compare favorably with the samples from fields of Kansas or Nebraska.
My word.
So, he purchased the property in 1899 and it was already known as Rocky Ridge Farm in 1909. So,
Well, if there is a single ridge going through the property, I wouldn't be surprised if that is what was left when the glaciers retreated and they periodically let go of the gravel that they had scooped up originally.
Yes.
And it came out and it fell and then made a ridge there. Okay, that's only my surmise.
So, as it stands now, those of us that are going to direct the band, and I'm bringing in the new director that is at Charlevoix High School, Tom Harder, is going to start assuming responsibilities of the band little by little. As he's ready to take on more, he'll take on more. But like this summer, he'll direct 2 numbers.
and and then I'll do the rest of them and intersperse possibility of former director Jane Bennett and a really good friend of ours who has his doctorate in conducting, Dr. Tim Topolevsky, who directs my wind ensemble that I've created, and he's going to do some this summer as well. So they've already picked their music. Gail already has it in the folders, and when the people come in for their first rehearsal next Tuesday, they'll have their entire 8 weeks of music handed out to them in order that it's going to be performed. And then we'll work for 8 weeks rehearsing everything that we're going to play in the summer.
How many days a week do you rehearse?
Just one. 2 hours on Tuesday nights, starting at 6:30 to 8:30, and we do that nine times before we start our concerts in the park on the last Tuesday of June.
Oh,
So we go from June until the third Tuesday in August.
So you do
8
the whole
concerts.
season beforehand?
Yep.
I see.
Yep.
Do you have rehearsals then during the week before the concerts?
Just Tuesday nights. These people are good players. They don't need to, and we don't allow a lot. We don't have time. I mean, people are busy. Lives are really busy. So it used to be that you rehearsed on Monday night and you played on Wednesday night.
I remember that.
And then we got a whole bunch of sailors in the band. Well, Wednesday night is sailing night. You can't have a band concert on Wednesday night, so we changed it to Tuesday night, and it was convenient for everybody. And right now what we do is we go down to the pavilion at 6 o'clock, we set up, and at 6:30 the rehearsal starts for the concert that night at 8. And we rehearse for an hour, and all it is just a spot run through. And at 8 o'clock the downbeat happens and we play the concert. So there are a lot of people that come and listen to the rehearsal. They listen to what we go through to put things together. And it's an art, I think, in itself to you have to, in a community band, it has to be fun. It has to be quality, but it also has to be fun for the audience. So you got to pick music. Our goal is to have people leave that concert whistling or humming a tune, or it doesn't take much to have all of a sudden a flashback. You hear a song and people will think back, that was 1945, I was out there on the boat. That happens to people, and that's what we want to have happen.
We're talking now with Evelyn Peters-Wojcik, and she is also, I believe, a Charlevoix native.
I am.
Born in Charlevoix?
I am.
You're a few years younger than I am, and your brother Clarence is a few years older than I am. But Clarence himself was a very accomplished trumpeter. Did you get your inspiration for playing the trumpet yourself from Clarence?
I did. Yeah, because when I wanted to get into band, I wanted to play drums like everybody else. And Odie, of course, said, "Is Clarence your brother?" I said, "Yeah." "Oh, he plays trumpet really well. How about you sharing a cornet?" And I said, "Oh, okay." It was like, but I did. And then I caught on, and I'd go home, and he'd, practice with me and show me things. And
well, of course, then the rest is history, because you became one of the most accomplished trumpeters, I believe, in the history of the whole Charlevoix High School musical education program. Where did you get your education after high school?
At Northern Michigan University.
The same as Gary did.
I was a senior when he came in as a freshman.
He said to me on the phone the other day that he's always been trying to catch up with you.
Yeah.
You're 3 years ahead of him.
Right.
And you're always 3 years ahead of him in everything.
Right.
And he really hasn't caught up yet. Okay.
Right.
So you got your education there. Where did you then start teaching?
I started in Clarkston in 1965. And that was when teachers could go just about any place. So I was there for 2 years. And then I went to Grand Blanc, and I went to Willow Run, which is down by Ypsilanti.
Right.
And the last year I was there, it was getting kind of rough. They tarred and feathered the high school principal. And
literally?
Yes, literally. And so I decided I didn't want to be down there anymore, or downstate someplace. So I came up here and interviewed in Traverse City. And of course, they hired someone that was right out of college. They didn't want anybody with experience, So I was headed back down to Willow Run, and I went out to have a bite to eat with Marilyn Novak. We were talking, and she said, my dad's still looking for a 5th grade teacher, but he's looking for a man. And I said, well, that isn't right. I said, I wouldn't mind doing that, but I'm not a man. I said, go home and tell him. So she went home and told him, and I got a call that night. I had an interview in the next morning, and I got the job here as a 5th grade teacher. And so that one year I taught 5th grade, and then I went up to 6th grade and beginning band. And so I taught beginning band here for I don't know how many years.
I just remember my dad had a store downtown, and it was like really busy, and always a lot of people there. And I was younger than like 6 or 7. And so, but when I was 10, then my dad said, well, you got to start working, and I want you to deliver newspapers. See, there comes the newspaper business into it again. And so he bought me a new bike with a big basket on the front of it. And at 10 o'clock in the morning, I had to be down to the store, and my dad would load my basket in my bike with the newspapers, and I had to go up the hill, across the bridge, up the hill to the beach hotel. And then I had to take my basket full of newspapers and take them inside and put them on their main desk. And then I was free to go and do my own thing with my friends until 2 o'clock again that same day in the afternoon. Then I had to be back for newspapers again, and then I had to deliver them down to the Belvedere Hotel. And those were the Chicago papers and the Wall Street Journal. And there was always the long porch at the Belvedere Hotel was always full of gentlemen waiting for their Wall Street Journal. So I did the same thing. I got off my bike, took the basket full of papers, took them in, put them on their counter, and then I was free to join my friends at Ferry Beach for a swim. So that was my first job at Dad's store.
It had a cigar lighter, and it was up on a shelf, and it was on kind of an arm, and you pulled this thing out, and there was a big snap, and there was this galactic fire that came on. If you had a cigar in your mouth, you would light it. Whatever happened to that?
I don't know.
That was a beauty.
I don't know what happened to that.
That would be a real collector's item. Put that on Antiques Roadshow today and it'd be worth a fortune.
Yeah, it was.
And nobody touched the cigar lighter except Joe.
Yeah.
We weren't allowed to service it. We weren't allowed to fill it. We weren't allowed to put the new batteries into it. That was Joe's baby.
But this particular one was drawn by an minister's wife, and she donated it back to the church. I think it's just a lovely picture that we use. Did we talk about the? No, let's talk about that. The council trees.
Let's talk about the trees some more. Mm-hmm.
The council trees are they're really old. They're falling apart. We had 29 of them planted at one time, each representing a family who came across from the Leelanau Peninsula as the original founders of the church. And they planted them, and then as they grew, they got to be about, I think, 5 feet, and then they would take the lowest growing limb and bend it down and anchor it to the ground so that as it grew, it would have a crook in it. And then they would cut off either the main trunk or the next strongest tree so that this would become the strongest branch that grew. And that's why they're so thick now. So it really looks like the whole trunk of the tree is bent. But what a biologist came and told us was that they actually cut the main trunk off and bent down a large limb to make it crooked.
Okay, that's interesting. So it wasn't, because I had visions of the central core of the tree.
Well, that's what I always thought too, but this apparently was an arborist of some kind that claimed to know what he was talking about. So
it is something and what was the rationale for that originally, the stories behind that?
Well, originally, it was really it was to keep the lumbermen from cutting the tree, because they didn't want crooked trees, they wanted nice straight trees. But one of the legends that we were told when we first started talking about the church was that the Indians planted the tree and made them, they didn't make them crooked, but they just said, we will all plant these trees together, and as long as they grow straight, we'll know that the white men have kept their treaties. And as it turns out, all of the trees are crooked. So, but that's a legend. And there were also some stories about it being the war between other tribes, so that as long as they grow straight, there's peace between all of our tribes. Well, that didn't happen either. So.
Our survey boat, the one that I had built, the steelhead that's docked here in Charlevoix, had some of those assignments also. I remember in January one year, Wisconsin fishermen were fishing over in our waters in Green Bay, and we took off, snowstorm, went across the lake and pulled a few of their nets, and that stopped them. But talking about gill nets, in 1965, when we were introducing the salmon and brown trout and lake trout, there was enough gill net fished in the Great Lakes system, that's all the Great Lakes, that would have gone around the world almost 3 times, to give you an idea of the multitude of net. Something had to happen to bring the fish back. In fact, my uncles who ran my mother's company in Bayport would pound on her table and say, "You're taking the money off your mother's table." And so I came up with, what's best for the fish is best for the fishermen, whoever they may be. And that seemed to help a little.
Good. So
over here, one very interesting thing, we have a plat book of Charlevoix County, 1901, and you can find all kinds of interesting settlement patterns. You can see the rail lines and see who owned the property in various places. My favorite things in this Michigan room are the yearbooks. We have yearbooks starting with 1924, the old Chanticleer, with its 20 graduating seniors, and about 60 pages in this little book. And then we have a gap until 1946, but we have all the yearbooks now from 1946 to the present, and they are all digitized too.
We have an art book that we've worked on, which we're very proud of. This library is gifted with many wonderful pieces of art. And we were losing information about the art, and so the committee decided that they would go to work. We had Lyle Jeanette photograph all of the art in the library, and then we did a book with the information that was gained, the history of the piece, or whatever we could add. And for example, the first page here is the mural that is in the main part of the library, and the information of the artist and so on. So that was another project that was done. So people, if they see art around the library, outside or inside, they can come and they can check our art book, and they'll have the information.
That sounded very interesting, and so probably because I spent so many hours in here with that project, I think the director thought I would want to do another job. So, yeah, she asked me if I would like to clean up and organize and evaluate the contents of the Michigan room. I immediately knew I couldn't do this by myself, so I recruited Kay and Marilyn and Mary Ann to help me with this job. They were all former teachers, and I knew they'd be focused and really organized. So I should say what the Michigan room was in the old library. It was, I don't know what it was initially, I mean, what it really looked like. But at the time, back in 2000 and 2001, it was a workroom. And it was, had a window that faced out into the library that was covered, by a curtain that was rather dingy. So, there wasn't really any reason for people to go in there. So, fast forward here, we're in the room and we're trying to clean up the clutter. And the room had lots of old newspaper clippings scattered around, and it was really in disarray. So the more we sorted, the more we realized that we didn't have the expertise to evaluate what was in the room.
Okay, first of all, I have an aunt, Edna Marie Neff Kennedy. She's passed away. She was the eldest child of Lance and Esther Neff. Then comes Gordon, and Bob was the baby. Gordon graduated in 1934 from Charlevoix High School. He played alto sax in the Charlevoix High School band. He was becoming a very good hunter and fisherman. Bob played the drums in the Charlevoix High School band.
Musicians.
He graduated in 1936. He was a football player. And Bob was more social than Gordon.
Really?
Gordon liked the woods.
Okay.
And Gordon left Charlevoix and went to Western State University. Michigan State University was called Michigan Agricultural College, and he studied forestry there for 3 years. Then he left. He left because my mother wouldn't marry him. And he hopped a train with one of his buddies, college buddies, headed for Alaska.
Whoa.
Freight train.
Okay.
And he got to Seattle, Washington.
To mend his broken heart.
He got to Seattle, Washington, and my mother sent him a wire saying she changed her mind.
So that's a good thing.
So he
you two are
came
sitting
back
here, right?
and he graduated from the Detroit Business College.
Okay.
And he was very adept with his fingers. And they used to teach something called stenotype. And he could take stenotype at 220 words a minute.
Stenographer.
Yes.
Okay.
But he never worked as a court reporter.
So this was completely something you wanted to do. You had felt part of Charlevoix.
We had talked about it for a long time.
Right.
Dad called up when we were still in Kalamazoo. He called up one night and said, if you want to take over the store, you probably ought to do it fairly soon. So that got us going.
Okay. So had you been living then in Kalamazoo?
Yes.
And that's when you were working in
For
your
Upjohn.
research? Yeah. Okay. So you moved back here about 1982, is that?
Yep.
And established yourself here and have been here ever since?
Yes, we have.
On the corner. But at one point, I think you had another store. Was it the one that Jim Williams? What did Jim Williams Pharmacy have to do with yours? Is that
Okay, that was, his was Dockside Pharmacy,
Okay.
where Subway is now.
Right.
And when they built the Kmart Plaza, we were approached to put a pharmacy on by the landlord. And at that point he said, if you don't do it, we'll probably have Walgreens come in.
Okay.
So we decided we'd give it a try. They were going to have a grocery store right next to it. That didn't last very long, so there went the anchor, and it was a failed experiment.
How long did it go on?
5 years maybe?
Let's say 5-6 years. Yeah, the grocery store was only open for like 8 months.
And that's sort of where Kmart would be?
The other side.
The grocery store is where the Farm and Home is now.
Oh, okay. And you were right
And the
next.
store was where the physical fitness.
All right, let's go.
I think I mentioned it, Goshen, Indiana. Freeland Boats was the name of the company. And he had a trailer that we still have, matter of fact. And we used to put like 3 or 4 boats on a pickup truck. And then this trailer was set up with, cogs, and you'd pile these, maybe 4. I think he even told me that one time they put 6 on this trailer and then bring them home. And if memory serves me, I think he used to pay like $72 for a 14-foot boat. Know how far back that? And his whole business thing was that if you could not pay for this boat in one season, or pay for whatever you wanted to do, if it wasn't a one-season thing, because we were seasonal, you didn't do it. And so he had it down where I think he used to rent these boats for, they could paddle out or bring their own engine, and $5 for the day.
Oh my goodness.
$5. And the stamp he used to stamp the postcards with was, I think, 3 cents. Woo! Different time.
Definitely.
And then most of his customers, I think, for like Southern Michigan, Ohio, and when the perch were in and he sent those cards out, the next weekend, whew, we had all kind of people showed up to, so they could fill their, the great part was, fishing was so good that he would, I think they could catch 50 back then. So they would fill a bucket up in probably half a day. They'd come in and people were saying, well, where'd you get those fish? And then they'd, hey, let's go out there. And he'd get 2 days, he'd get another $5.
About what year was that?
It had to be, I think I was in grade school, middle school. So it had to be in the 50s, 50s and maybe early 60s. And then of course it went away. So we had to shift gears, do something different.
The great thing about the Chestnut Cottage was that right over the riverbank, of course, was the channel where the boats entered and left Charlevoix Harbor. And we could go right down the hill, and I'll show you what it looked like then. This is a picture of the way the channel was at that time. And there was kind of, would you call that a bay, a little bay?
Well, what happened was the federal government would, on the north side there, to the right of the boat, they would start the revetment out to Lake Michigan from that point. But since the Argo Milling Company owned that property, they said that they did not have to put revetment in front of commercial property. So your house was right up on
here.
The right hand, at the right margin where those trees are, that is where your property was. So you could just walk right across the street and right down there. And your dad used to keep his 3 boats there.
Oh yeah, first we had a little boat called the Jean, and then later Dad had a boat called the Nor'wester, and then the Beaver was the last one he had. And but it was so convenient for us just to go over the hill. And there was our boat. Of course, that's not that way anymore.
You say that it forms people. How do you think architecture forms people?
Yeah, that's of course interesting. The architecture, an architect compared to an engineer. An engineer, sure, he has to be very intelligent, smart, has to know how to put things together. The thing has to hold up and this and that, but that is his main purpose and maybe his only purpose. He's not really involved, what does that column really mean to people? He only thinks, what does the column and the beam mean to the building? Whereas the architect has to consider, what does the building which he creates with the help of other trades, of course. What does it mean to people? See? So then, because like Winston Churchill, like I said, we create architecture and architecture creates us. You see, so that when you want, like the library here, right? I mean, look at it. I mean, the architecture, which is terrific, and it's a beautiful building, and it really forms the people that work here, first of all, as you should know, and the people that use it, like all the little children that I see in the back there, they, even without looking at it or really say, oh, look at the, you know, it will form them. I guarantee you that those little kids where the parents are, you know, savvy enough or so to take them here or send them here, they will never really know what it really did to them. With that, compared to an ugly building or a building like a factory, you know, where there's no
Nothing
ambience,
warm or
no
beauty. Yeah.
Right, no beauty. And because we all are flexible, you know, we are part of our environment. That's why, like, living in Charlevoix will have an effect. Either people that are drawn to it, that are already seeking the natural beauty of Charlevoix, or the people that grew up here and became, you know, part of that environment without knowing it. You see that I would think in Charlevoix now there are a lot of people from the outside, but I guarantee you the people that are drawn to Charlevoix are ones that always like beauty, like the serenity,
And the outdoors,
sunset,
and
the outdoors,
being part of the outdoors.
nature,
Yeah.
the balance,
Yeah.
you know.
All of that.
And where the people who are born here, they have it by themselves, they don't even think about it. And sometimes they move away and all that, and they say, oh, because they may think the whole world is that way. It isn't. Right. And again, like they say in real estate, you know, location, which I strongly believe in. Same in terms of architecture. If somebody comes to me wants to have a house designed or so, first I got to know where is it? Yeah. And why is it? Yeah.
Well, she was a single mother with 3 children, and she had to make a living. So she decided that she would bake. So she started a little bakery in her home on 13th Street. And we lived there, and she had her little front part of the house, that would have been the living room, set up as her store. So she had a chance to move downtown, down State Street, and run a big building there.
What was that building like that she was in then?
There were 2 stores, and then there were apartments upstairs. And we kind of lived in the back part of the bakery. The sleeping quarters were upstairs. Mm-hmm. She worked, that was what she did. And
did she rent out rooms upstairs also?
Yeah, there was two apartments upstairs, and she rented the apartments.
What was it that brought the family then to Charlevoix?
Well, Ronald and Grace went to Detroit, and when they came back, he was talking to a salesman at the bakery that my mother knew, and he said there was a bakery in Charlevoix. So he came up here and looked and started a bakery.
Now, when you say Ronald and Grace, you mean your brother and his wife?
Ronald, my brother. Mm-hmm.
Did your mother come up also at the same time?
Not at the same time, but shortly after that, my mother and I moved up here. My brother Leo stayed in Traverse City and went to school. Then he came up here and finished school here.
In the mid-1930s?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. 33, 34.
Okay. So that would have been during the Depression.
Well, I guess so. We didn't know there was a depression. I didn't know there was a depression.
Because there was always enough bread to eat, right?
Yeah, there was always. we didn't go hungry at all.
Mm-hmm.
When we got to Bitburg, we came in the back way and we drove around the corner and we came up to this house, and my dad said, I don't believe it. This is the house that was standing When I was here, the whole town was flat, except for that house. And it had some damage, and it was a beautiful house. It had stained glass windows, and it was really beautiful. But I had my darkroom in the basement of that house, and that's where I learned to, I made big pictures, 3 feet by 7 feet. I bought big pieces of plywood, and I would do them in the basement. And like I say, I bought a nice camera. And,
Did the Air Force ever ask you to do some photography for them? Did the Air Force
No,
ask
not the Air Force. No, they didn't do that. But I did do a lot of scenic photography while I was there. We would go hiking and go, various places, and I had lots of pictures of the cathedrals and the countryside, and I'd make big prints and put them on my walls in our house there. And my squadron members would come over and they'd see the pictures and rave about them, and so I give them to them. So I gave away most of the photography.
Some original Terry Solomonson.
Yeah. Wow. So anyway, I really got to loving it, and I kept thinking, gee, this would be awesome if I could do this for a living. So I thought, when I get out of the service, I'll have the GI Bill. I'll go back and get a master's degree in photography. So I contacted the University of Michigan and Wayne State. And I went to University of Michigan. I got a letter back, said, our class is full this year. You could apply next year. The master's program is filled. And I got a letter back from Wayne State, and I had sent a box of pictures with the application to Wayne as kind of a portfolio. And I didn't have a regular portfolio. All the pictures I had were glued to a piece of particle board that was about a ½ inch thick. So the box weighed about 60 pounds, I think, and we shipped it over to them. And the teacher wrote me back and said, well, we don't have a master's program, but when you get back to the city, come and see me and pick up your pictures and we'll talk. So I did. After we got back in June of '72, I went down to Wayne and saw Mr. Wilson. He was the head of the photography department. And we got talking, and he looked at my pictures and said, I really like, what you do, and he said, we don't have a master's program here in photography. He said, but we've been thinking about having one. He said, would you like to help me write the curriculum? And I said, you gotta be kidding. He said, no. He said, I think this is what timing is right. So
we had been looking around and talked to historic preservation people, and we needed an architect. So one of our friends had an architect down in Detroit, so we thought, oh, we'll go with him. And so he had worked with Larry Shawn in laser construction out of Petoskey. So, okay, then he'll be good. You would think that we would put a lot of research into this, but no. Just God sends us people. We need somebody, and somebody shows up, and they turn out to be really good, and they point us to somebody else. Larry had worked with Tony Pearsall in town here, Pearsall Construction, and this group of 20-year-old guys, and they had never done anything like this before in their life, but they were really good. Tony looked at what was there and tried to match the construction that he did with 1918 construction, which is not the way you're trained at all anymore. He was good for the project. I went, and they were all excited that I had the Loeb barns, and one of their construction people had restored over 500 barns. And he said, oh, sure, I can fix that. So we got him to come up, and he put jacks on the floor every so many feet to jack up the part that was sagging. And then he put chains and winches to the ceiling, and every day or every so often he would turn it a click, and he'd turn the jacks a click, and it would slowly get it back to where it should be.
Well, literally raising the roof.
Yes. If you did it all at once, it would break, but if you just do it a little bit at a time, it goes back into place nicely.
Was there ever a time during the restoration years that you and Richard looked at each other and said, my God, what are we doing? Have we bitten off more than we
Oh,
can chew?
often. Well, first we say, how hard could this be? That's one of our family mottos. And then we say, whatever made us think we could do this? And then after about a minute, you just go back to work and do it.
By John Dixon in 1866. Now, if there are any two persons who need to be mentioned in streets in this short interview that we're doing, it would be John Dixon and Seth Mason. These two had a tremendous impact on the history of Charlevoix. They're completely different. John Dixon and his wife Phoebe were both highly educated, graduated from Oberlin College in the East, and arrived here in 1855 with no place to sleep, spent their first night in an abandoned fishing shanty on Round Lake where Edgewater is now. Seth Mason arrived a couple of years later in October of 1857. This map is a pigeon overview of Charlevoix. What it shows is that Seth Mason actually owned a farm, eventually the farm, which is almost the entire south part of Charlevoix. He owned the whole farm, except for where the Belvedere Club is. All this over to Carpenter Road was Seth Mason's farm. John Dixon, on the other hand, across the bridge, owned the farm on the other side. He owned almost all of North Charlevoix, and between the two of them, they apparently owned the land where the village was. And that's what this plat showed, was that in 1866, and the writing down here was very hard to discern, but it comes out that John Dixon and his wife Phoebe and Seth Mason and his wife Phoebe, auditors of the village, donated this land in between what the Wags call the Mason-Dixon line, but in between here for the village. And they hired John Dixon to lay out these streets. So he was the one that, and between the two of them, they probably named the streets, I suppose.
Big movies like they do today come out around the holidays and in the summer. And the first movie we showed that started on the 22nd was a movie with Burt Reynolds and Dom DeLuise. And then that ran for 1 week. And after that, our second movie that came in just before New Year's started was Cabaret with Liza Minnelli. And that was a huge hit. And after several months at the Academy Awards or something in March or whenever that was, oddly as it seems, the Cabaret won the Academy Award for the Best Picture of 1972, and the Burt Reynolds and Dom DeLuise movie was named the worst movie of the year. So our opening 2 weeks, we had the worst and the best, but we had good attendance at both of them just because we were open. And we got a lot of good positive publicity. In fact, I think that one of the reasons that they agreed to finance it, I remember the bank telling us that you guys don't have any money. And we didn't. We were only in our 20s. And I said, and we all borrowed money for the down payment. And we all paid it back. But the bank it was kind of a civic project with the bank too. And I remember the bank had a lot of positive publicity in the local paper, They wrote a nice editorial about how it was that, modestly, 3 young enterprising guys bought the theater, and an enterprising bank in Charlevoix agreed to finance it. And
we're, you could say we lived the Robert Frost adage of home is a place where when you go there, they have to take you in. We were living in Dearborn, and basically my parents' marriage broke up. My mother became ill, and we came back up here because this was where her family was. And one of her sisters took my sister, and the other sister, Grace Warren, and her husband Harrison, took my mother, my brother, and me onto the farm, which is, as you know, was 7-8 miles south of Charlevoix and is run to this day by his son Douglas. It's one of the most successful dairy farms, certainly in the state, if not wider. And we started out there, and Harrison Warner was the kind of person who taught you how to drive a truck at the age of 9 in a hayfield pulling a hay loader. And if you didn't respond, he would clang the roof of the truck with his pitchfork and scare the daylights out of you if you stalled the truck or something along those lines. And but he was one of those men who would give you things you didn't think you could do, and you'd find out you could do them if you just did it. So I think from him I got a kind of a confidence that I never would have acquired anyplace else. You wonder, do I have what it takes to succeed in the wide world? You know, am I smart enough to get through college? You don't know until you try it.
That's true.
And I went down there, and I had no thoughts of a career, or not a career. I had no thoughts of making a living. I just wanted to study French like Vince, you know, and I wanted to study great books. I just wanted knowledge. And I from the outset, it was apparent that English was the right major for me, because that were the things that concerned me.
Well, this love of literature set in when you were in school. I can remember you devoured books. As a kid, you went through books. I think you probably read 10 to my 1.
I love you saying that, because the Radigans had given me a book by Somerset Maugham, and it was Maugham's assessment of the 10 greatest novels ever written. And I remember trying to read them all. War and Peace was one of them, of course. You know, oh my God. But yes, there was this. We worshipped books. I did. To me, they were the ticket to everything. I mean, in terms of knowledge or learning.
Tell us a little bit about your family history. Where did your family originate from in northern Michigan?
Charlevoix.
What about
Charlevoix, Michigan, right here.
Do you have a connection to Beaver Island?
Yes, I do. Both of my parents were born on Beaver Island.
Mm-hmm.
And both of their fathers were fishermen, and they met in Ludington.
They met in Ludington?
My parents.
Uh-huh. Now, your dad went on to become a captain.
He was a fisherman first, then he was captain on the North Shore.
Which ran between Charlevoix
and Beaver
Island.
And then he went from that to the Emerald Isle. He went to Sturgeon Bay and picked up the Emerald Isle and brought it back here.
Mm-hmm.
And he was on there for a few years. And he also ran the Bay Queen once in a while.
That was the dinner boat here in about 1980.
And then he left here and went on the ore carriers, which was the Weir, the Mudge, and the Ogilvy. And from there, he went on the North American, the passenger ships that used to come in here.
The big one.
He was a mate on the North American.
Where did he go on the ore boats? How far around the Great Lakes?
Mostly like Buffalo. I think they used to go, I'm not really sure about that, because I never got to make a trip on one of those.
How long was he usually gone on one of the trips?
He was away from home until wintertime.
So you didn't see him until the wintertime?
Right.
Ah. And then he was here for a few months, then the ice left, and then he was back on the lakes.
Yep.
So it was quite a while before you saw your father again.
Yeah.
Did you ever go to another port to meet him for any time off?
Not on a ore carrier.
Uh-huh.
But then we left Charlevoix. He did winter keep on an ore carrier in Moraine, Ohio. And we lived on that ore carrier most of the winter.
You lived on it?
Yeah, we lived right on there. Because he had to stay there. He maintained for the winter.
Back in '58, I was a cook. I stayed on the Sundu for 4 years, and then I got out.
Okay.
And then about 9 months back later, I came back.
Now you had a major role, a very major role, in the rescue of the 2 men who were on the Bradley when it went down in Lake Michigan in November of that year, right off Beaver Island, on the far side of Beaver Island. And according to the book that was written about this, you were on the bridge with the captain during the search and rescue mission. Nothing had been found to that time except a few unfortunately perished bodies. And you were looking out through your binoculars. Can you tell us what happened?
Well, you know, it's so long ago. I kind of forgot about it until I read the book. And anyway, the cook's responsibility when search and rescue was in effect was on the bridge as a lookout to see if you can see any objects out in the water. Well, apparently I was up there. I said, I see an object in the water off the, I think it was the port bow. And Captain Muth was the skipper at the time. And he took the binoculars, I believe, and looked out the binoculars and saw the object. And from there, you go to your other search and rescue position, which I volunteered to go in a ramp boat with Jack Copens. I think you remember Jack Copens. He was on board the ship as well. And sure enough, off the port bow, if I remember correctly, were 2 men on a raft. And they proceeded to bring them on board ship, get them warm. In fact, the corpsman Toussaint was also on board ship. He took care of the men.
Now this was in very rough conditions. How long did it take to get the men, for you to get to them and then to get them onto the boat?
Quite a while. I can't recall how long the time. You know, when you're young at that age, back then, all you think about is search and rescue, and everything else is out of your mind. You don't put it in your mind to remember it. So I really can't recollect. I know it felt like it took days, you know, because of the seas.
Mm-hmm.
And to get them on board was really treacherous. I didn't have anything to do with that. Was John Massey and a couple of the other guys that were on board who were on what we call the cargo net over the side. Were fighting to get Mays and Fleming on board the ship.
When you spotted them, did you have any idea that these men might be alive?
No, I did not.
So you had to get it right up close and personal before you could determine that they could be rescued.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a tough job for them men that went over the side to get Mays and Fleming to get them on board the ship.